to Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we are broadcasting live on August 29th from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. Hurricane Idalia is bearing down on Florida, and later on in the show, we're going to get an update with a meteorologist from the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network. We're going to begin the show, though, looking at Saturday's mass shooting in Jacksonville and how easy access to guns in the U.S. is fueling hate crimes. I'm going to read here from the AP for a sentence or two about what happened in Jacksonville. Authorities say a white man wearing a mask and brandishing a weapon with a swastika emblazoned on it fatally shot 3 black people in Jacksonville in a racist attack. The assailant opened fire Saturday at a Dollar General store in a predominantly black neighborhood, leaving 2 men and 1 woman dead. The gunman then killed himself. Jacksonville Sheriff T.K. Waters says the crime was clearly motivated by racial hatred, saying the shooter hated black people and the shooter had tried to gain access to a historically black college. The group Giffords put out a report called How America's Gun Laws Fuel Armed Hate, and we're going to talk about those connections with our guest, Giffords Research Director Kelly Drain. So welcome to Tuesday Cafe, Kelly.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really glad that you could come on to talk about this important topic and a very timely discussion that for some reason we as a society have been putting off and not really taking very seriously, it seems. So we'll try to take it seriously here, and maybe that will be the beginning of a serious discussion that can save some lives. So let's begin with, what's your group? What is Giffords?
Yes, so Giffords is a national nonprofit organization founded by the former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. As some people may remember, in 2011, she was shot at a constituent event in Arizona. And then after the Sandy Hook shooting, she founded an organization that works to reduce gun violence in America. So we as an organization study the causes and the costs of gun violence. We educate the public about gun safety solutions, and we share our expertise with policymakers nationwide to promote efforts to prevent gun violence.
And this report that I'm referring to is called How America's Gun Laws Fuel Armed Hate. And we're going to talk about some of the solutions in just a bit, but let's lay out the issues for our listeners. So what is the connection between hate crimes and gun laws?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one is that we know that a large percentage of mass shootings and gun violence in general is connected or has some connection to hate. In fact, in this country, there are 10,300 firearm hate crimes each year. So that's 28 per day. And we also know that the risk factors behind that motivate people to have these hate-filled ideologies also are connected to an increased risk of other forms of violence. So it's really critical that our laws are properly addressing this nexus between hate and violence.
And so how difficult is it for someone who has committed hate crimes already to be able to access firearms?
Yeah. So under federal law, if you commit a felony hate crime, a crime that raises to the level of a felony, usually that's a crime that's punishable by more than 1 year in jail, you would be prohibited under federal law. But we know that many hate crimes are prosecuted as misdemeanor hate crimes, and federal law does not prohibit people convicted of misdemeanor hate crimes, which can still be incredibly violent, cause tremendous pain for victims. Those are not prohibiting events, and people convicted of those crimes at the misdemeanor level can still access firearms. Some states have taken action to close that loophole, but there are still, the vast majority of, the majority of states that have not addressed that loophole in our laws.
Let's talk about some of the recommendations that you have for states and for the federal government that they could enact that would protect Americans from armed hate. We'll start with universal background checks to ensure that people purchasing firearms are eligible to possess them. What would that entail?
Yeah, so universal background checks are the foundational policy that, we really need in this country. Under current federal law, you are required to undergo a background check if you buy your gun from what we call a federally licensed dealer. So if you go to, a gun store, a brick and mortar location to buy your gun, you will undergo a background check. They're very quick. Most of them make an immediate determination and are completed within 90 seconds. But this is a really critical foundation for every type of gun law that we have in this country, because if we're creating categories of eligibility, if we're saying that certain people aren't eligible, but we're not actually screening them, then we're really only doing half of the puzzle here. So it is really critical that we have universal background check laws, and studies show that those laws are associated with lower rates of violence and also lower rates of gun trafficking, which fuels a lot of our country's gun violence epidemic.
Do we have an idea of how popular that is or unpopular, whether Americans support or don't support background checks?
Yeah, so this is, again, one of the reasons that it is a priority policy is because it is incredibly popular with the American public. I think the American public kind of understands that this policy just makes sense, that, we get background checks to have certain kinds of jobs. And so it makes sense that to let people have a deadly weapon, we would, make sure that they don't have any prohibiting criteria. And polling data that we see nationally and at the state level shows that 90% of Americans support these policies, with high support among Democrats, Republicans, gun owners, non-gun owners. So it really is an incredibly popular policy among the public, but has not gotten the same traction among policymakers.
Our guest is Kelly Drain, Research Director with Giffords, and we're talking about the connection between hate crimes and gun laws. And just a reminder to people that later on in the show, we will get the latest about Hurricane Idalia. You're listening to Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan. We're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. And I want to continue to ask about some solutions that Giffords is putting forward, some sort of policy solutions. One is that military-style weapons and large-capacity magazine regulations, that if there are regulations that would more thoroughly regulate civilian access to these military-style weapons, what difference would that make in safety in the U.S.?
Yeah, so military-style weapons, like the weapon used in the Jacksonville shooting, and then large capacity magazines, they significantly increase the lethality of shootings, particularly these mass shootings that we are seeing, horrible accounts of almost weekly. When people have access to a military-style weapon, they can fire bullets more quickly. Large capacity magazines let them have more bullets in the gun, so they don't have to pause to reload. We know that period where people pause to reload can be a time that victims can flee to safety. We saw that in the shooting that my boss experienced, that when the shooter was reloading, people fled to safety. So there is some good evidence that restricting the kinds of weapons that people have access to can reduce mass shootings and reduce gun violence generally. One study, for example, found that states that regulated large capacity magazines were 56% less likely to experience mass shootings.
And Kelly, we have a caller on the line, if you don't mind taking a call. And I should say that we're broadcasting live on August 29th, and the number to call in is 813-239-9663. You can also email dj@wmnf.org or text 813-433-0885. And you're listening to Tuesday Cafe. And I'm Sean Canan. Our guest is Kelly Drain, Research Director with Giffords. And we have Art on the line in Lakeland. Hi, Art.
Hi, how are you? The question I have is, why can't we treat guns like we treat cars? Why can't we have a division of firearms like we have a division of motor vehicles? And you have to go there, you have to take a test, you have to pay, you have to get, in order to get a license. And then once you have your license, you've had your background check and your license, and then you treat it just like you would a car thing. You'd have to renew it every 3 or 5 years, and that way every time you bought a gun, it would immediately be registered, just like, a car is registered. And we have, thousands of veterans?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it's a really wonderful question because many states have actually enacted systems that are very similar to that. Maybe not as extensive as what you're describing, but there are several states that have what we call licensing laws or permit to purchase laws that require people to get a license, to obtain safety training, to be fingerprinted before they can get a permit to own a gun or to purchase a gun. And those laws are incredibly effective. I think one of my very favorite studies looked at Missouri repealed this law and Connecticut implemented this law, and gun violence went way up in Missouri and way down in Connecticut. So it is a very effective kind of system that we can put in place to reduce violence.
Well, thanks so much to Art for that call. And maybe to follow up on that, one other thing that you could use a car registration as a model is the fact that everyone is required to purchase car insurance. And there's been this discussion about whether there should be ammunition insurance or gun insurance for people who have firearms because there's such a high risk and high liability potentially there that maybe they need to be insured and that the government needs to regulate that.
Yeah, I think that's another really interesting policy solution. It's something that we haven't really seen states or localities implement, broadly speaking yet, but it definitely is an idea that potentially could be effective in reducing gun violence.
Well, let me go on with the other recommendations that were made in this How America's Gun Laws Fuel Armed Hate report from Giffords. And this next one has to do with extreme risk protection order laws. What does that even mean, extreme risk protection order laws, and how would that be, could that be a help in the solution for this problem?
Yeah, so extreme risk laws are a really innovative policy solution. They're built on other firearm protection order laws that we have that have existed for a long time, but they operate a little bit differently. So the way that they work is that they allow law enforcement, or in some states, family members and other key members of the community, to petition the court for an order to remove firearms from people that are demonstrated to pose an imminent risk of violence to themselves or others. So this is a determination that's made by a judge based on very, very strong evidence. But it is something that we see as very effective. Florida passed one of these laws in the wake of the Parkland shooting. My understanding is that shooter had been the subject of multiple tips to the FBI, had been in contact with law enforcement, but law enforcement did not feel that they had a legal mechanism to arrest or otherwise diminish this person's access to firearms. And so these kinds of laws, these extreme risk protection order laws, actually do create that legal process to remove firearms when there are warning signs. And the reality is that before most mass shootings, there are a number of warning signs that are observed by others, and people are generally concerned about these individuals before they perpetrate their attacks.
Kind of going off of that answer is this question that comes in from an email from Bubba, text message that is, and he's kind of drawing the connection to find out whether there's a connection between mental health and gun violence. Bubba writes, I found it interesting that the Jacksonville shooter's dad called 911 before the shooting and said that he was off his meds. And so Bubba says, is there a connection then between mental illness and these mass shootings?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So what the research has actually found is that it's better to look at sort of dangerous behaviors and dangerous warning signs rather than diagnoses of mental illness. Simply because the vast majority of people in our country that have mental illness will never be violent. They're actually at increased risk of experiencing violence and victimization themselves. So, we try really hard at Giffords to make sure that our laws are based on when individuals are displaying dangerous behaviors and less so when they have a particular diagnosis. Again, I keep pulling out the studies, but I'm a researcher, so I have to do that. But one study found that if we had a magic pill that could sort of cure all mental illness, we would only reduce violence by about 4%, because that's sort of the percent that we can attribute to diagnosable mental illness.
There was a researcher at Duke that I interviewed a few years ago on a similar subject to this, and the question of the conference that he was at was, is there a connection between mental illness and gun violence? And he had a similar conclusion to what you said based on his research, and he found that the two main causes that can predict whether there will be gun violence or not is, one is does a person have a violent background, like if they've been arrested for a violent crime, or two, do they have access to guns? Those are the two main criteria that can predict the amount of gun violence that's likely. I don't know if you're familiar with that study or if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I think there was a really great study too that came out of the FBI just recently looking at active shooters. And, it found that the kinds of behaviors that preceded these kinds of events were things like, people got divorced, they got laid off from their job, and it created these sort of crises. So it was less about having a diagnosis of some mental illness, but actually experiencing this big life stressor and having access to firearms.
Our guest is Kelly Drain, the research director with Giffords, and we're talking about the connection between hate crimes and gun laws. And later on in the show, we'll hear more about Hurricane Idalia. We'll get the latest forecast. You're listening to Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan. We're broadcasting live from the studios of WMNF Tampa on August 29th. And we're talking about some policy changes that could impact and could reduce gun violence, especially gun violence that's attached to hate crimes. And one of the other conclusions that your report finds is that laws that prohibit guns on government property and at civic events like protests, demonstrations, or meetings of legislative bodies would protect from these hate-fueled gun violence crimes. How would that work?
Yeah, so, there are many types of laws that restrict access to guns in certain sensitive places. There are laws that prevent people from bringing guns to schools. Some states have passed other kinds of what we call sensitive place restrictions. And I think these laws are particularly important because everyone in this country needs to feel that they can participate in civic events. Everyone needs to feel safe when they go to vote. Everyone should be emboldened to go and protest and demonstrate, to hold cultural celebrations, pride parades, etc. And so it's really important that we have laws that can prevent guns from being introduced into those spaces where there is public debate and discussion, perhaps, or where vulnerable groups are represented. So these laws are really critical. And again, I think it's not just critical to preventing gun violence, but I would also argue that it's critical to preserving and protecting our democracy. If people don't feel comfortable and safe participating in our democracy, I think we have a really big problem, that not just a problem of safety, but a problem of our democracy.
And the final policy suggestion that you make is that hate crime offenders should be disarmed. What does that entail? How would that work, and why would that be effective?
Yeah, so right now, if you are convicted of a misdemeanor hate crime, that you would not be prohibited from having firearms in most states in this country. We know that people that commit hate crimes are at elevated risk of committing future violence, that sort of, like we were talking about related to mental illness, that behavior of committing violence motivated by hate is a significant risk factor for perpetrating future violence. And so these laws would add, another category of eligibility that people who have been convicted of these kinds of crimes would not be allowed to purchase or possess firearms.
So we've been talking about your report and about how connections between hate crimes and gun violence. So is there anything else that we haven't covered in this conversation that you'd like to let our listeners know about before I let you go?
Yeah, I think it's, we saw in Jacksonville, we have seen too many times where there is anti-Black gun violence, anti-Jewish gun violence. And, this is really a product of our lax gun laws that really allow people that are filled with hate to carry out horrific acts of violence. And I think it's really important that people understand that these are preventable. There are policies we can put in place to reduce the frequency and lethality of these events. And we don't have to live in a society where this is happening with such frequency.
If people want to find out more about Giffords, where can they go, or to read this report?
Yeah, our report is available on giffords.org, GIFFORDS.org.
Well, thank you so much for coming on Tuesday Cafe, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Kelly Drain is a research director at Giffords, and we've been talking about the connection between hate crimes and gun laws. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan. I'm broadcasting from WMNF live on August 29th, 2023. And we turn now to our next topic, which is Hurricane Idalia. It will impact our area tonight and tomorrow. In a few minutes, we're going to be joined by a meteorologist live to get the latest update. But right now, let's hear an update that Governor Ron DeSantis gave within the last hour about Hurricane Idalia. I can tell you that it formed into a hurricane this morning. It's expected to make landfall along Florida's Big Bend, north of the Tampa Bay area tomorrow as a major hurricane, a Category 3. And as of the 8 o'clock forecast track this morning, Idalia is expected to be due west of Pinellas County as a Category 3 hurricane with 120-mile-an-hour winds at 2 this morning. So we'll start feeling impacts several hours before that. Mostly wind and surge at first, but we'll also get a lot of rain as the bands go through as well. But let's right now listen to a few minutes of Governor Ron DeSantis speaking about an hour ago.
As of 8 a.m. this morning, Hurricane Idalia is located approximately 130 miles south of the Dry Tortugas with winds in excess of 80 miles per hour. It is officially a hurricane. The storm is forecast to make landfall along Florida's Big Bend tomorrow morning as a major hurricane. The National Hurricane Center has issued a hurricane warning for the Gulf Coast from Sarasota County up through Franklin County and the Panhandle, and storm surge watches are also in effect in those areas. The National Hurricane Center advisory includes that if this storm hits at high tide, storm surge could reach 8 to 12 feet in some areas. And so that would be life-threatening storm surge. I know all those areas are under evacuation notices in the low-lying and coastal areas. You run from the water and you hide from the wind. If you're there in that storm surge, you're putting your life in jeopardy when it gets to be that high. So if you are giving those orders, please heed those orders. You do not have to leave the state. You don't have to drive hundreds of miles. You have to get to higher ground in a safe structure. You can ride the storm out there, then go back to your home once the storm passes. There are evacuation orders for coastal and low-lying areas in 22 different counties along the Gulf Coast, as well as throughout North Florida. To make these evacuations easier on families, we have directed FDOT to waive tolls in Citrus, Hernando, Hillsborough Lake, Pasco, Pinellas, and Sumter counties, and that started at 0400 this morning. For those evacuating, Visit Florida has activated the emergency accommodation module with Expedia. So if you want to find a hotel, you can go to expedia.com/Florida. We are continue to coordinate with the power companies across the state. We had, as of this morning, over 25,000 linemen stationed, more on the way. So you will have most likely between 30 and 40,000 linemen when the storm hits will be in the state of Florida, and then they will immediately move to commence power restoration efforts. We've also been working with counties to make sure that they know that we have resources ready to deploy, and we want to be helpful to support their efforts. So we have received more than 450 active missions that we are coordinating. Every resource request we receive has either been filled or will be filled by the end of this morning. We do have 420,000 gallons of fuel staged and ready to deploy, and additional assets are expected over the next few days. And the gas stations that will be prioritized will be the ones along the heavy evacuation routes. We have 8 urban search and rescue teams activated and over 580 search and rescue personnel ready right now. We have delivered 431 pallets of water, 303 pallets of MREs, and over 1,200 tarps to communities that may be impacted. We've got many more gallons of water and a lot of MREs that are ready to be deployed as needed. There are over 20 shelters open, and additional 20 special needs shelters are mobilizing or on standby throughout the state of Florida. We have 5,500 National Guardsmen that have been activated. We have deployed 247 Starlinks with another 529 staged in Central Florida, and they will be deployed to impacted areas as the needs arise. 42 school districts have announced school closures over the next 2 days, along with 16 state colleges and 7 Florida universities. Our Florida Department of Transportation has more than 600 personnel, including over 220 cut and toss crew members, with more than 400 pieces of heavy equipment and trucks strategically placed across the state to prepare for cut and toss operations post-storm. And if you look at that track of where it's going now, you are going to see a lot of debris. There's a lot of trees along that track, and it is going to knock down trees, it's going to knock down power lines, and there's going to be a need to be able to clear a lot of the right-of-ways. Florida Department of Transportation has about 1,100 generators en route to impacted areas, and they're going to use that to get the traffic signals up and running as soon as possible when the storm passes. As wind becomes stronger later today and into the night, FDOT will be coordinating with FHP and local law enforcement to close bridges once the speeds reach in excess of 40 miles an hour. Road rangers will be concentrated along evacuation routes to help motorists. We have also called up 33 ambulance strike teams with over 200 ambulances that are ready to surge into any impacted area. We've also requested an additional 6 strike teams through our Emergency Management Assistance Compact with other states. So this storm is going to hit tomorrow morning. You will start certainly seeing effects of this in different parts of the state later on today. You still have time this morning to be able to make your final preparations. If you are in one of those areas that's in line for some of the major storm surge and you're told to evacuate, you have time to do that. But you got to do that now. You don't have to go hundreds of miles. You can go to a shelter in a different part of your county, go to a friend's house in an area that is not going to be susceptible to the storm surge, hotel. All these things are good to do. And you should do that and heed. This is going to be a major hurricane, likely a Category 3, and where it's scheduled to hit along this big bend, and we've not really had a hurricane strike this area for a long, long time. I think you got to go back to the 1800s before you would see a path like this. And so those coastal areas there, have not necessarily been through this before, and I think that being safe is the appropriate thing, and erring on the side of caution is the appropriate thing.
I just want to pause this for a second to remind you that you're listening to Governor Ron DeSantis. This was a press conference he gave last hour about the updates from Hurricane Idalia, and you're listening to Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan. We're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa, and in just a few minutes, we're going to bring on a meteorologist from the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network to talk about Hurricane Idalia, to talk about the latest forecasts and about what you need to know in this area. Just a reminder that the Tampa Bay area is under a hurricane warning and a storm surge warning. A surge of up to 4 to 7 feet is anticipated in Pinellas, Hillsborough, parts of Manatee, and in Pasco counties. It's even more north of that. So please know where you are and how far the surge is expected to come up. That's a very high, strong storm surge. Coastal Tampa Bay area counties have issued mandatory evacuation orders for Zone A, so that often includes low-lying coastal areas, and it also includes mobile homes in most cases. You can find out your evacuation zone on WMNF.org, or you can go to the state website, Know Your Zone. Expect heavy rain over the next 2 days and a chance of tornadoes. Let's go back to hear a little bit more of this press conference from Governor Ron DeSantis, and we will hear from Megan Borowski, who is a Florida Public Radio Emergency Network meteorologist, in just a few minutes. You're listening to Tuesday Cafe.
We will, of course, be mindful of any changes in the path of this storm. I think everybody on that Gulf Coast from Tampa Bay up until Northwest Florida must remain vigilant. They have nudged the track a little bit further west over the last 24 hours. I mean, we were looking at potentially Levy County, I think, yesterday and today. Now we're looking more at a Taylor County. There's some models that say it may go even further west. So places like Tallahassee, where we are today, certainly you could end up having it hit Tallahassee directly and some of the surrounding areas. So everyone just remain vigilant, continue to watch and listen to the local orders that you receive from your local emergency management personnel. I want to thank everybody. We've been in contact with people from most of these counties over the last few days. Everybody's working hard. Everybody understands that that this is a significant event, and they're remaining calm, cool, and collected. But they're executing, and that's what we need to continue to do. I want to thank everybody here at the state of Florida for working hard. They've been working now round the clock and getting the resources where they need to be as those requests come in. And of course, once the storm passes, we're going to immediately go to commence any type of rescue operations, and of course the power restoration will be a big priority. Go to floridadisaster.org/get-a-plan if you have any questions. Again, you still have some time this morning and into the early afternoon, but as we get throughout this day, you are going to start to see rain and wind pick up, particularly the further south you are in the state of Florida. And by the time we get to the end of tonight, you're gonna see some nasty weather. So just be warned about that, and do what you need to do right now to be able to keep yourself and your family safe. Okay, we're gonna hear from Kevin Guthrie, Division of Emergency Management.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Governor, again for your continued support and leadership. As of this morning, Idalia was upgraded to a Category 1 hurricane and is expected to continue to strengthen as it makes its way through the Gulf of Mexico. The storm is going to be here very soon. By this time tomorrow morning, we will pretty much lock down the EOC, and we will be working through those issues. The state is working overtime to fulfill requests made by counties in the path of the storm. To date, we have filled 400, or we are actively working 461 missions. We have closed 72 missions for a total of 552 missions. Counties, please continue to send in your resource request so that we can take advantage of the time we have left. We're going to have about another 18 hours or so that we can move commodities. After that, we will not be able to do that any longer. We're doing everything we can to ensure that communities have the necessary resources they need. But you as a household owner, you need to take action now. You need to get you and your family, businesses, you need to get your employees ready now. The time is now. I implore you to finalize your disaster preparedness actions right now. I want to stress again, even if your community is not in the forecast cone, it does not mean you're in the clear. I'm going to use a graphic to my left. If you're in red on this graphic, you're underneath a hurricane or tropical storm warning, or you're underneath a surge warning. If you're in pink, you're under a watch. That is well outside that cone. So again, people are going to experience issues with this, from trees down, power being shut down, heavy rains are on the east side of this storm. It's going to be a very fast-moving storm, but please, if you're in the red, don't focus on that cone. Focus on, if you're in the red, you need to take some type of protective action, and you need to do that now. If you decide to shelter in place, identify a safe place in your home, away from windows where you can shelter safely. The same thing applies to the very first thing that we're going to experience most likely in Florida, which is a tornado. If you find yourself in a tornado watch or warning, please get yourself to an interior room free of windows, put a mattress over your head. Even if you have some type of bicycle helmet or something like that, you need to protect your head from tornadic activity. If you're evacuating, do not leave your pets behind. Make sure you have leashes, carriers, plenty of food and water for them. Evacuations can be stressful on the whole family, so please pack comfort items for your kids, like their favorite toys, games, or snacks. Make sure that before you leave your home, or if you're sheltering in place, if you can pick it up, put it up. If you cannot pick it up, tie it down. Minimize the amount of items that can be picked up and overturned in your neighborhood. Whatever you decide is the best for yourself and your family, again, the action is now. You must do it now. If you're unsure about the next steps of what to do, please contact your local emergency management office. We have also launched the State Assistance Information Line, or in true emergency management vein, we have plenty of acronyms, or the SAIL line. You can contact them at 1-800-342-5787. 1-800-342-3557. Again, that's 1-800-342-3557. That's the state assistance information line, and they can take any requests that you have. We have operators standing by now, and that is a 24/7 hotline. They will help you out with how to prepare before, during, and after a hurricane, road closures, alternate routes, available open shelters in host and impacted counties, shelters designed for medically dependent individuals, and reentry information. All of that is available at that number. You can also, of course, get up-to-date information by visiting our emergency information site at floridadisaster.org/updates and following us on social media at FLSCRT or at FLCERT. We also just launched yesterday a new guide for newcomers to Florida and visitors to Florida. That is available at floridadisaster.org/guide, floridadisaster.org/guide. I will talk very quickly about an operational component that we're going to experience in this particular disaster, and that is this storm is going to move through during the day tomorrow, and then we're going to be at a point where we might be able to start operating towards sunset. But we're going to be operating in areas that are without power. These are going to be very, very delicate tactical operations. They may be done from the river. They may be done from creeks. They may be done from helicopters. So again, it's not something we like to do, which is operate in a dark environment with power lines entangled in trees. But again, we understand that people are probably going to call 911 and need some assistance. So we, along with counties across the area, are working with FWC, the Florida National Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard on how we're going to best be able to help those persons in need. So we're working through all that today, and then we'll get in our later press briefing today as well as in tomorrow, we'll start talking more about recovery efforts. Again, Governor, thank you so much for your time, your leadership, and support.
Well, that was Kevin Guthrie, who is the state's Division of Emergency Management leader. And before him, we heard Governor Ron DeSantis. They were both speaking last hour during an update about Hurricane Idalia. Again, Hurricane Idalia formed into a hurricane this morning. It's expected to make landfall along Florida's Big Bend, north of the Tampa Bay area tomorrow as a Category 3 major hurricane. And it is going to be affecting the Tampa Bay area beginning tonight, that is. And about 2 tomorrow morning, it'll be due west of Tampa Bay. It'll be a Category 3 hurricane. It's anticipated to be that already by 2 a.m. Tomorrow morning with 120-mile-an-hour winds, but it will be offshore. So we'll be getting some tropical storm force winds, but we are not anticipating in the Tampa Bay area, at least, to get hurricane force winds if the track holds the way it has been predicting. The Tampa Bay area is under a hurricane warning and a storm surge warning, so that's important. If you live near the coast, please be aware that a surge of 4 to 7 feet is anticipated. I'll be asking my next guest about this because right around 2 in the morning is when the next high tide is after this afternoon, and so that combination of the king tides and the 4 to 7 foot storm surge could be deadly storm surge if you live along the coast. For that reason, coastal Tampa Bay area counties have issued mandatory evacuation orders for Zone A. You can find your evacuation zone on WMNF.org. Expect heavy rain over the next 2 days and a chance of tornadoes. Also, I should tell you that the tolls were waived on highways in the Tampa Bay area and in the Big Bend. So if you're going over the Sunshine Skyway or on the Selman Expressway or in the Florida Turnpike, those are toll-free for now, probably for the rest of this week at least. Tampa International Airport is closed. St. Pete Clearwater International Airport will close today at 3. And we are bringing you an update about Hurricane Idalia from WMNF Tampa. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan. And we are joined now by Zoom by Megan Borowski. And I want to welcome you back to WMNF's Tuesday Cafe, Megan.
Thanks, Sean, for having me.
I'm really glad that you could join us. Let's start with what we know about the strength and track of Hurricane Idalia and how the Tampa Bay area fits in.
Right. So Idalia became a hurricane this morning, 5 o'clock this morning. It was declared strong enough to be classified a hurricane. Still a Category 1. It's got winds now up to about 80 miles an hour. Pressure has dropped to 977 millibars. It's moving northward at about 15 miles an hour. And we can continue to see signs of strengthening. We're actually waiting for the 11 o'clock update to come in, and it might come in while we're on the air here talking. But throughout the rest of the day today, we are expecting this storm to intensify, continue getting stronger, those winds getting faster. In terms of the Tampa Bay area, Idalia will likely almost parallel the coast through much of the day today. We're looking at the onset of tropical storm force winds sometime tonight into tomorrow morning. That's the latest forecast from the NHC. It looks like the most likely time of arrival actually is sometime tonight, again, from south to north. So Sarasota will start feeling those wind gusts before Tampa, St. Pete. And then those winds will continue moving northward. So we've got that. We do have the potential for those outer bands to start wrapping ashore. Models are a little bit wobbly in terms of timing of that, but it looks like showers, thunderstorms, heavier rainfall rates sometime tonight after sunset is when we could get those first outer bands wrapping inland. And the issue there is we can have a risk for tornadoes from those outer bands. And because they're going to be arriving at night, that adds an extra element of danger to it, because we're going to be going to sleep. It's dark out. We're not really paying attention as much. So I urge you, as you do wind down for the evening tonight, make sure you have alerts on your cell phone so you can take appropriate shelter if a tornado warning is issued for the Tampa St. Pete area. But Idalia should continue moving northward. We're actually expecting landfall over the Big Bend, Forgotten Coast, Apalachicola, anywhere to St. Mark's, and then down to Steinhatchee, Cedar Key, anywhere in that area tomorrow morning shortly after sunrise. And it's at that point Idalia could actually be a major hurricane. We're looking at Category 3 strength right now from the latest model data. So anywhere between 111 and 129 miles an hour is that Category 3. But thankfully here in Tampa, it doesn't look like we're going to be dealing with a landfall, but on the back edge of that center of circulation, we're going to have winds from the west pushing onshore, and that gives us the risk for storm surge flooding in the Tampa St. Pete area. And I think the latest forecast, they haven't changed all that much, but it looks like 4 to 7 feet for the immediate Gulf Coast, and then also for Tampa Bay itself. 4 to 7 feet of storm surge and inundation in the forecast. So lots of different hazards arriving at several different times. But I think the main takeaway as this situation unfolds over the next 24 to 36 hours is to keep posted to the latest forecast, the latest nowcasting, so you can keep your family safe and really kind of in this evolving situation.
Our guest is Megan Borowski, a meteorologist with the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network, and we're talking about Hurricane Idalia. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan. We're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa, and we're live here on August 29th, and a listener wrote in with a question that I think I'd like to hear your answer for, Megan. He writes, David writes, why does the National Hurricane Center wait to give warnings on the true intensity of a storm? And he says, I think it was pretty obvious from the extraordinary warmth of the Gulf that the storm would be very strong, but the fact that it would be a Cat 3 wasn't officially announced until a day or two ago. Why not warn about the presumed intensity several days out? So that's actually one question. His other question is decent too, so I'll ask you that as well. He's wondering if we've ever seen a hurricane with such high confidence across almost all of the computer models, and he said it doesn't look like spaghetti models, it looks like uncooked spaghetti in the box. So what about those questions?
Yeah, a big clump. That's a good analogy. For the NHC, there's almost protocol in terms of watches and warnings and when those are issued. So you have, I believe, watches are issued, I believe it's 48 hours in advance, and warnings are 36 hours in advance. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure of the actual timing. I believe those are the 2 hour points though, but that's for watch and warning issuance. So people have enough time. And then in terms of talking about categories and strength in forecast discussions, we have been talking about some models spitting out rapid intensification, and some on the higher end of the strength of the Saffir-Simpson scale, and other models have have pumped out, no, this is going to be category 1 at landfall. So it's taking in all of that information, weighting the validity of each model, or how each model performs under each different scenario. There's a lot of things that kind of fuel weather forecasting. Yes, it's the model output, but then it's, are there events similar in the past where we saw, pre-existing conditions like what's occurring now, and can we kind of compare and use that to help predict? And then also, if you get one model run that predicts a Cat 4 or a Cat 3, but you have a couple other model runs that predict Cat 1, well, how do you weight those? And there's the social science behind it as well as, do I ring the alarm bells if just one model run said Cat 3? So it's a very complicated situation. The closer in time we get to landfall, the more confidence we can put in our forecast. And also, a couple days ago, we didn't even have a closed center of circulation with this system. So that's the other thing, too, of we can't make calls on intensity for a storm that really hasn't even developed yet. We can have those discussions out there, but you've really got to be careful once you put out that official forecast of Cat 3 or something along those lines. Overall, the main goal of forecasting is to keep people safe, give people plenty of time to make those judgment calls and make their preparations, but at the same time, not cause unnecessary panic or concern. It's a juggling act. It's difficult.
Let's talk a little bit more about storm surge. You were mentioning that on one side or the other of this hurricane is when the prevailing winds might be pushing water toward the coast, which would increase the amount of surge. Also, overnight tonight, there's a high tide. How do all these factors play in, and when should Pinellas, Manatee County, Pasco County, Hillsborough County, when should we be most concerned about the storm surge overnight?
Well, it's all going to depend on where the center of this system is, tonight at high tide times. Because in the instance of this particular storm, we have the center is going to stay pretty much offshore, and it's going to be moving northward. So for a time, we're going to have winds offshore, and that should be pulling the water away from the coast. Now, of course, that's just a general description. The shoreline is much more complicated than that. But generally, as the center of the storm, as we have those offshore winds, we won't have that storm surge inundation. We have a strengthening storm, so those winds are sucking all that water out. And then once the center of the storm moves to our north and to our northwest, we're going to get those onshore winds on the back edge of it. All that water that was sucked out is going to get bulldozed back in. So it looks like the next high tide for Tampa Bay area is going to be at about 1:30 this afternoon, or the next high tide rather, and then 4 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. So 4 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, the center should be to our north, and that's when we'll have those onshore winds. So really overnight tonight into tomorrow, as the tide starts coming in and we get those winds from the west, that's when we really need to be on the lookout for water levels to really rise. And again, the official forecast for Tampa Bay and the St. Pete coast is about 4 to 7 feet.
And that's why there's been some mandatory evacuations ordered for Zone A near the coast, because 4 to 7 feet, I mean, that's a lot higher than a lot of the land that's right near our coasts.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And, I think a common misconception or a common assumption with hurricanes and tropical systems, everybody focuses on the wind, but the biggest killer is water. So take these evacuation notices seriously. This swiftly moving water, this storm surge flooding, it comes in relatively quickly. It can sweep cars away. So what it can do to humans, it'll sweep you away, and it's not a good situation. Evacuate if you're told to do so. That is something that I can't stress enough.
Our guest is Megan Borowski, a meteorologist with the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network. I'm Sean Canan, and we're talking about Hurricane Idalia on Tuesday Cafe. And we haven't talked yet about the whether there's links between this hurricane or other hurricanes and human-fueled climate change. What can you tell us about that?
So right now, we haven't gone through any rapid intensification or anything like that yet. It's still a Category 1 storm. We've got El Nino that's ramping up that could detract from tropical development. I'm listing all of these things because when you're looking at climate, you've got to look at the amalgamation of a long period of time, of years worth of weather, and then analyze the trends. So, as we go back and we look at the frequency of events and how quickly storms spun up, then we can really make the comment on climate. What I would say right now is we can have all of those conversations after this event is over. We can really look into the data. Once we have all the data post-event, right now, focus on getting those preparations in and getting yourself safe.
Let's talk about those preparations. It's a little late now, but there is still time before the storm really impacts us, that people could, especially, people could be getting their emergency kits together here at the last minute. So what kinds of things would you recommend people have in their emergency kit?
The basics: comfortable clothing, shoes, closed-toed shoes, sturdy shoes that are waterproof. You're going to want to have a gallon of water per person per day for anywhere of 3 to 5 days. Non-perishable or shelf-stable foods. If you have it in cans, make sure you have a can opener. I can't stress that enough either. Cash, make sure your car is fueled up. Prescriptions, if the pharmacy is closed, because we're not only preparing for the storm itself, we're also preparing for any power outages and lasting impacts post-storm. So just food, water, prescriptions, any of those necessary items. And, you each know for your families what you need to get by day to day. What are the basics? Health and hygiene items, hand sanitizer or wipes, disinfecting wipes, especially in the advent of the COVID era, as I like to call it. And then in terms of maybe a few supplies for your house, tarps, something to secure tarps down with, flashlights, batteries. Those are all the main essential items. And if you do have pets, because I've got one myself, food and water for them too.
We've been hearing a lot about generator safety. So maybe can you remind people, if there is a power outage, if you do have a generator and then you end up using it, what are the best tips for keeping yourself and your family safe if you have to use a generator?
Well, operate it in an open, a well-ventilated area. Please don't operate it in the vicinity of a garage or no ventilation, because the exhaust fumes are, potent and lethal if you inhale them. If you're exposed to them for a long amount of time. Keep it in an area outside, away from other items. Make sure you're storing the gasoline and the fuel for that properly as well. Again, you don't want to be handling gasoline. You guys all know that the safety for those sorts of things. And monitor it. Don't run it and leave it alone. Keep checking on it. In the post-storm situation, you can still have debris around, debris smashing into it. So just check on it and make sure it's running properly and it's in a safe zone and it's not causing any additional problems, because this is likely not to be the situation in Tampa where first responders won't be able to reach you in a timely manner, but that's really depending on the amount of storm surge flooding. But there is the potential there that you are left to fend for yourself. You are your own first responder at some points. So keep that in mind. Practice safe practices. And, I guess that's all I have to say on generators and the emergency response.
Here in the Tampa Bay area, likely the first big impacts that we'll be having from Hurricane Idalia later this afternoon will be when the storm bands from the hurricane pass through our area. And so tell us about the types of storms that we might expect, thunderstorms, but also the chance of tornadoes.
Right. So these outer bands, it's almost like, when we have those squall lines of thunderstorms coming on through, they set up, they can, it is a squall line of thunderstorm activity. And due to the rotation of the actual hurricane itself, these little storm cells could get rotation. And that gives us the chance for damaging wind gusts and also for quick tornado spin-ups. Now, generally with a hurricane, they trend to be weaker tornadoes, but you can get stronger tornadoes out of these outer bands as well. So anywhere from Sarasota, really the entire Tampa-St. Pete area, even as far inland as Lakeland, and then northward along and west of the I-75 corridor, we've got a chance for a few tornadoes tornadoes really later on tonight as those outer bands start arriving. And then throughout the day tomorrow, they'll continue to wrap onshore as Idalia moves northward and makes landfall with the Big Bend.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on Tuesday Cafe, Megan.
No problem. Stay safe, everybody.
All right, thanks you too. Megan Borowski is a meteorologist with the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network, and we've been talking about the approaching Hurricane Idalia. Please keep yourself safe and be informed. Our website, WMNF.org, has information. Your county's emergency management has information. The state does as well. I want to thank our guest earlier in the hour, Kelly Drain with Giffords, the research director there, talking about the connection between hate crimes and gun laws. And if you missed any part of these interviews, you can watch them on our website, WMNF.org, beginning this afternoon. I want to thank our phone screener, Greg Bowers. You have been listening to Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, News and Public Affairs Director at WMNF Tampa. During this time slot tomorrow, we'll hear Midpoint, hosted by Shelley Reback. Coming up next is Wavemakers with Janet and Tom Scherberger. They'll talk about the challenges of teaching African American history in Florida. This is WMNF Tampa.